Добрый вечер, уважаемые зрители. Мы ведем с вами трансляцию.
Good afternoon, our viewers. Hello to all of you. We have the 19th Minsk forum organized by the German Belarus Forum in Berlin, and this is the event that's taking place in Vilnius, Warsaw, and Berlin. Please look at the dates of the event in your own city, and we are under the premises of Amaguru in Vilnius. We have had already several panel discussions, and the topic of the forum today is other topics of cultural identity, political system in Belarus, and issues of independence. And the topic of today actually unites us under one important date, that is 30th anniversary of independence of the country. And this is the final panel discussion, which is streaming online, and we now make the conclusions. We have been talking about the past, about the present, and now we have a final discussion. Andraй Казакевіч is the director of the Institute of Political Studies, Political Sphere. Uladzimir Астапенка is representing the National Anti-Crisis Management, is responsible for multilateral diplomacy, ex-ambassador. And Alяксей Кажарскі, he is a doctor of philosophy, he is at Charles University in Prague, PhD researcher. Thank you very much for joining us in this panel discussion. And as I've told already to our viewers, this is not the first discussion, this is a final discussion in our forum. And I'd like again to reiterate the question by Alexander. Why we need Belarus? Why Belarus for all of us? Who is ready to answer? Who will be the first? Alexei, maybe you, please?
Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you for presentation. I already tried to answer this question before. You know, sometimes people choose not to live in their own country for the reasons not related to political issues or economy, but besides those routine issues and dependence on what is more comfortable for you in terms of culture and social, you know, area. So there are some conservative mechanisms that keep the people in place, and then there is also a project, like a project of the future, that is considered to be more attractive.
Таких образов в Беларуси.
And in Belarus, of course, we have had something that before that was articulated by the government as well. There is stability and also having some certain level of standard of living. And of course many things happened, and the government was not able to present the social contract properly. And again, this standard was not enough anymore. This modernization says that also the political requirements become higher and higher, and also there is a view of the future which says, well, it's cool to be a Belarusian because, you know, there is a certain portrait which is close to the people. Yes, please, your turn. Thank you. Sorry, there is no sound. Sorry, for technical reasons we cannot say there is no sound. Now the microphone is on. Thank you very much. Okay, to love Belarus, you have to go to other countries, first of all. And of course, we have the right to create our own home and to build our house in the way that we think it is correct to do it. And in our history, we had different periods when the Belarusian state was prosperous and was considered one of the strongest states in Europe in Middle Ages. And then we didn't have a state at all. And today we have 30 years of our independence. However, unfortunately, we are saying it under conditions when there are certain dangers to that independence, and there is a long way to go before we can really be independent in considering our own future and establishing our own future. And for the Belarusians, it will be difficult to strengthen their place under the sky, and I believe we still will be able to build that house. Andrei? Well, we need to answer the question, why we need Belarus? Well, I cannot answer this question because, you know, there is a question, why you need money, for instance? And perhaps it's stupid to ask an economist such a question. Well, when this issue is actually solved, then we don't ask the economist about that. Well, when we discuss about the Belarus, what kind of Belarus should be, why we need Belarus, generally speaking, I don't know even how to address this issue. Well, maybe just, you know, by having fun. Well, logically speaking, well, why we need Belarus? Why we need to build Belarus? Why we need to pay attention to this topic in the first place? Well, I don't know. Why? Can we just change Belarus to another country, just leaving Belarus, for instance, rationally speaking, and still we are Belarusians? Well, most probably we don't need Belarus. We don't need Belarus at all. There are places like New York and Melbourne and other places like that. I really don't know. I believe that the question like that is most probably not related to real life. Okay, thank you very much for your opinion. And this is the discussion that we have, and we'd like to show different opinions. Okay, the topic of our discussion is on the road to the new Belarus. What it will look like, and when we have something like certain time, and when we think about what kind of Belarus we will have and what is the road for New Belarus, so that we have a strategy that we put ourselves in the point when we have this New Belarus, and then we will talk about the characteristics, what kind of resources we need on this road, and what kind of things we need to achieve it. One of the aspects is the aspect of independence. In the new Belarus, the issue of independence and Belarus from the perspective of independence. What kind of Belarus that could be? Andrei, let's start with you. You have the microphone, right? Okay. First of all, I don't think that there is a danger to Belarusian sovereignty and independence. The argument is simple. How many countries stopped to exist after the Second World War? Most probably there are no examples like this. What about new countries? Well, there are dozens of those. There are more and more countries. The sovereign countries become smaller and smaller, and Belarus is similarly going on that way, and basically how can we actually build this sovereignty? What can we do about it? And nobody needs it apart from ourselves. Yeah, there are some comments. Well, and I think the state of Belarus will exist as long as the Belarusians themselves need it, and nobody will basically fight against the Belarusian sovereignty. Of course, there are some external influences, and that will stay, but the question of sovereignty and independence, this is done and solved for centuries ago. Well, this is the question concerning the history of Belarus. It's about its centralist direction. What about the influences from Russia, let's say, from the EU side and so on? Yes, of course, the zone of interest of Russia, that is important, as long as it is interesting for Russia. If we have an analogy how the empires were dissolved and terminated in the 20th century, if the center is ready to invest in peripheries, financially or any other resources, then the situation can be remaining the same. And there are many influences in Belarus. It's not only Lukashenko, it's economy. We have half of our turnover with Russia, and there is no other country in the world. And in the post-Soviet space, around 10-20%. There are certain influences through elite, through education, and so on, and social things more than anything else, and don't see any other mechanisms that would allow to eliminate this question totally. And also it's important to see what kind of relations Russia will have with the European Union. And if they become better, most probably we'll have better relations also with Europe and with the West in general. Unfortunately also, a lot will depend on the Belarusians themselves. There are too many factors, external factors primarily, that would not allow to change at will our orientation and direction, and the whole population is oriented not to change the geopolitical orientation, and it's a really quite stable situation sociologically. And the last 20 years, the main tendency was just some people were increasing their illusionist views, and there was no serious dynamics of a serious or more serious Euro integration in the direction of that integration. So speaking about the future, is there a chance that we can strengthen our neutrality, the position of neutrality in geopolitical sense for the population, or, as you said, in terms of isolation or neutrality in terms of geopolitical direction of Belarus? Well, neutrality, yes, it's a bit different problem. I believe that here everything will depend on how much the Belarus and its elite will want themselves. If the Belarusian elite would like to have the neutral status from the 1990, there were windows of opportunity to realize it, but they didn't use the opportunity for the reasons that are well known. But if we wait and look for such opportunities, it could be achieved. For Belarus, it could be most probably the optimal option to reach certain level of neutrality and to go away from any links, strong links to either Russia or the EU or the United States. But we need to work a lot in this direction, and there is no consensus so far in the Belarusian elite on this issue. Thank you, Andrei. Alexei now? What about you? What do you think about what we can do today so that we can change the status of sovereignty of Belarus in the future, and how you see that status in the future?
Сейчас? Да. Спасибо. Отлично. Ну, у меня две ремарки такие.
I have two remarks. First, the conceptual one. We are speaking about sovereignty, but it's difficult to understand. There are theorists in international relations. Stephen Kraston, for example, have analyzed it, and he's speaking about several aspects of sovereignty. There is a formal sovereignty, and there is a factual one. For example, the ability to control movement of information, capital, assets, people through the borders, and nobody has it in nowadays world. There is also inner sovereignty, the ability to control what is going on inside your boundaries. And there are countries with formal sovereignty, for example, Libya, being accepted by everyone, but they do not have the inner sovereignty. It is, in English, we would call it a failed state. So we need to understand what we're talking about if we're speaking about sovereignty. That's the first thing. Neutrality, and how to depict it in future, I cannot forecast here, because I'm not an expert. I'm from the academic environment, and we do not feel well about the forecasters. But I think it's important to understand that there is a lot of uncertainties when we're speaking about neutrality. And I agree with Andrei that there are several inner political factors that in this or that way make this way quite problematic. As for example, now we're in Lithuania. For example, the Baltic states have walked this path in the 90s, and they were focusing on coming back to Europe. But the Baltic states were not even in one regional initiative, were not involved that Russia has promoted. But Ukraine, for example, signed a lot of different agreements and contracts, although many think that Ukraine was separate from Russia, but it's not true. Kravchuk, for example, signed the declaration. But neutrality is such a thing that for which we need factual circumstances. For example, Switzerland. Switzerland is really a neutral country, unlike Belarus. It is not involved neither economically nor in the military arena. But there is such a thing as geography. Also cultural, economic, political issues. One Slovak commentator said that if you want Switzerland in Slovakia, but in Slovakia we don't have enough Swiss to make it Switzerland. So to broaden up the horizons, political horizons, and to look at the historical neutrality, for example, Belgians. Okay, we can have an opinion that Switzerland is great, but neutrality has had quite a notorious result in the past for some countries and some nations. So that also has to be taken into consideration. So concept, so it's not only Swiss experience that we have on neutrality. There are different other stories and examples. If you are in a certain geopolitical zone, geopolitical area, although I don't like this term, as one Czech author said, this idea of the bridge between the East and West, it is not good to be a bridge, because excuse my Russian today, because bridge is being used and people march on the bridges using their boots. Thank you, Alexei. So Alexei doesn't like forecasting. Let's ask Uladзімір. What is your vision of sovereignty of Belarus in future, and what can we do today, and what other subjects, other stakeholders can do in order to reach this point that you might foresee? I would be very happy I would be extremely happy to see that nothing threatens the sovereignty of Belarus. Today we can speak theoretically about many things, about sovereignty also, or how it is formed, what are the components of sovereignty, and we know that integration processes in general mean limitations or self-limitations of sovereignty when the state consciously, voluntarily gives some part of its sovereignty to the national level and to the level of international organizations, and they also obliged to work together with these international organizations and obey the rules. And here we have the example of the European Union, and it's not that simple how this European Union was formed, how the relations and balance and decision making in the European Union was developed, and the qualified majority on many issues, the unified opinion on also many sensitive issues. So again, the union state, for example, yesterday we know that roadmaps have been first drafted but now accepted, and nobody has seen them, but now, well, as we know, they have been published, so most probably we are going to read them and look through and again see that neither sovereignty of Belarus nor identity is not threatened, but I can hardly imagine this mechanism of decision-making, balanced decision-making in the framework of international organization where there are only two states, and one of them 95% on all economic and other factors covers all the spheres, and another one has only 5%, and these are two states. And but still, this state that has only 5% says that it's sovereign. Of course, if it's unilateral agreements and decision-making process, yes, then the small country can defend itself. But if it's international secretariat and international organizations, then the sovereign abilities come into a different light. I understand that these 30 years didn't pass to no avail, and Belarus was following its, we could say, its vector, its main vector, and the last 25 years unfortunately didn't show the progress that we counted on. Most probably these were years of stagnation and maybe recession, but anyways, in any case, these 30 years let a new generation of Belarusians grow. The post-Soviet generation, people who perceive Belarus not as some empty sound, not as Western region of a big Russian world, but they perceive Belarus as their house, their home, the national state, where we as Belarusians have the right for our identity and self-identification. So yes, we can say that we have been successful in this, but in the nearest future, I think this new generation might take effort, and when the effort is made, then it can be, all these processes and system can be fortified in the sphere of sovereignty. Thank you, Uladзімір. Andrei, do you have anything to add? Yes. I want to speak about the vision, about what kind of Belarus we might have in future and in the international light and arena. So most probably I have several concepts. The first is for post, which means that if it's either east or west, most probably it's east, and Lukashenko has been speaking about the eastern vector a lot, but most probably it's not the best variant. Another is the bridge metaphor, which has also been mentioned. So Belarus has a bridge between the two, so there is some movement through that bridge. Again, we have only two shores that we can connect. Again, most probably this is not the best variant because the contacts between the two centers, they can be just direct, and we do not need the bridge. But also there can be a metaphor of a hub when we might be acting as like sort of a bridge, but actually as a platform where very flexible communications between different regions of the world can happen. Most probably for Belarus, the formation of this regional hub and international relations would be optimal solution. I don't know if we can make it, but we strive for it, and that would be good. Can you comment what subjects and have to act and in what way so that we reach this vision? As I have mentioned, first what has to be done is as a result of inner discussion and inner dialogue, we have to reach consensus so that we understand where we're going. the mainstream needs to be formed according to this idea. That means we do not have to go extreme. Are we turning to the east or to the west? Are we transit? Are we the bridge between the first and the second? First of all, we need to change our understanding and approach, understanding of what is our place in this region. Unfortunately, sadly, if we take nowadays discussions, political discussions, yes, this is the paradigm. We are somewhere on the break, or we are a bridge where some changing point. If we don't have our own identity and we do not strive to call it this way, nobody will arrange it for us. So first it's consolidation, and next we need to wait and use every opportunity to step by step form this concept or bring this concept into this region and seek for it to happen. Thank you. It's a very interesting idea. Next topic is state management, state system. What it should be, how should it look like in future, how can we reach it? And most probably the first expert to talk on this topic is Uladzimir, because Uladzimir has been involved in this system mostly. How do you see it? Most probably today I represent the system of the old generation, although we had a very nice dialogue and a fruitful discussion about how it could be organized in a new way. We have come to a conclusion that due to certain circumstances we do not see the break in elite on the background of the political processes that have been taking place in last year in Belarus due to the results of the elections. And all in all, the state management is authoritarian in Belarus at the moment. It's very vertical regime, and it's only one-way connection, which excludes any smart initiatives and any dialogue and any flexible reaction or solutions to new facts, new arguments, new challenges. But at the same time, we can see that all in all, in the statehood of Belarus at the moment, there is potential and experience and discipline that international experts also see, and the system can work in an effective manner. Most probably the most important task for the future is to change this, not the system itself, but how it works, and to use the potential of those state officials who still have, who haven't violated human rights in Belarus, who haven't taken part in repressions, and we might retune, reboot this system, adapted to new rules, and on this basis we can then build a new Belarus. What characteristics would be absolutely new from the ones that we have today? System-wise, management-wise, I would start from following the rules, following the legal system, operating within the legal framework, and the system does not have to be meant for one person only. It is meant as a service for all the people, all the citizens, and in this way it can develop in a sustainable way, notwithstanding the political changes that might happen in the authority. It is very important that the state has such a tool which ensures operation of all areas in the country, notwithstanding, one more time I'm saying it, of the some decisions made by the authorities. So if the citizen A, citizen B, or citizen L suddenly quits, then everything is destroyed. We cannot even have this kind of approach. If the citizen A, B, or L quits tomorrow, all the functions of the state need to keep operating, and the system has to be sustainable, and the system does not have to depend on the whim of some individuals, and this is how it should be reformed. Thank you, Uладзімір. Аляксей, you do not like forecasting, but as an academic, maybe you can discuss with me and analyze best practices. Uладзімір has been mentioning best practices, best world practices that we can implement for the state system. How do you see the effective state system that can be implemented in Belarus? I do not like speaking about something I know nothing about, and where I'm not an expert, since I'm not an expert in public administration. This is a separate area, separate field, a separate discipline, research on public administration. Although public and state are different things. I think and not everyone feels the difference. To my mind, most probably I trust the experts who say that if we compare these processes with Ukraine, that has been mentioned today too in the morning, the quality and the state capacity of decision making within the state is quite high in Belarus. Of course, we also have the term state quality. This might be more difficult and not as good, but state capacity is there for sure. I also would like to add, but I'm non-professional in this case, that very often this is associated, this effectiveness of public administration is associated with the individual, with Lukashenko, who is saying that we need to be harsh, we need to do it in this harsh way. But these are issues related to a broader context. This is labor ethics. And role-based behavior. When you rule-based behavior, when you act according to the rules, and this is a very broad social context, and not even one authority leader can change it. For example, from you in Singapore, he has been mentioning that I cannot build Singapore in Africa because they have a different labor ethics, and the role of the individual, one individual, however strong the political figure he might be, it cannot build it all alone, and we need to talk about it. And in future, we have to understand that this role of one person cannot be as huge as it is now. Thank you, Alexei. Andrei, we are going to ask you what is your vision of the state system. Maybe I would like to speak about higher level constitutional political system. I think that authoritarian regime in Belarus everybody has had enough of this authoritarian regime, and it doesn't, sometimes it is purposeful to fight for this and to protect this regime, but there are three main theses. Authoritarian model can form the state so the state building can emerge from it, or the economy also can emerge from it or can be developed by using it. In Belarus, state institutes are already have already been created, they already exist, so we do not need to compare it with Africa or Latin America of the 60s, the 70s, and so on. This issue is solved. Nation building. In this sphere we have the same situation. Authoritarian regime didn't bring anything to the table in nation building area, and I think it was nation building was forming and building its capacity not due to authoritarian regime, but notwithstanding the fact that it existed. And if we look at Russia, authoritarian or this authority is handling these issues and solving the problems without us assessing if it's good or bad. The state can also want to create an empire, and then again we need authoritarian approach. So Erdogan, Putin, they in nowadays world they can do it and they do it, but Belarus doesn't aim at it. So then again we don't need authoritarian approach. And next, economic growth, and here speaking about South Korea of several periods, Singapore, Southeastern Asia. Again, speaking about this authoritarian approach which can solve problems on the market, can solve economic problems, can ensure stable, sustainable economic growth, but we can see that even this function is not functional in Belarus, and in the past 25 years we have a stagnation period economic-wise too, and authoritarian regime cannot solve this problem and is not proposing anything how to tackle it or how to solve it, so it's not even developing. So all arguments for authoritarian regime in Belarus and for keeping it, they don't work. We need to shift to the democratic approach. And of course, apart from this authoritarian discourse, we have a very broad democratic consensus, and it has to be parliamentary, presidential state. Nobody wants presidential or president-based state anymore. This is how I would see the future of Belarus. Of course, maybe we can discuss some details, but I think that would be best for nation building, state building, and for economic growth. Thank you. What is the role of technologies in the state system in public administration? What can it be? Same as in other countries. It's difficult to think of something. It's difficult to create something new. What about electronic state management and its role? Yes, in Belarus we have good opportunities to implement it more often and wider than it is now, and it can be a base of state. What model can we take? Maybe Estonian model could be an example. I don't know in detail how much of it can be implemented in Belarus, but from our region this is a good example, Estonia, which we could take as a basis. Thank you.
К следующей нашей теме, когда вспомнили...
And now we can see that you actually built a bridge to our next topic when you mentioned Estonia. So about the future of Belarusian identity identity in the future. So before we go to this topic, I'd like to address our audience and say that you can leave your comments and your queries and we will read it to our panelists, so please write your comments. So we start with Alексей now first. How do you see the Belarusian identity and all the narratives that are related to this concept for the future? Yes, now it's working, thank you. That's a question for the whole lecture, you know. Well, we have time, and you can tell us something. Well, it's difficult to make any prognosis because there are certain things happening that nobody can predict. And this is our topic of today also. In the previous panel I was also saying that these processes are spontaneous sometimes, also to mention the rhetoric of these protests in Belarus when there was a recommendation of symbolic heritage mixed with myths of the partisans and so on. All the diversity of symbolic resources there, and I believe that this will continue. Coexistence of different narratives, the narratives of Belarusian national revival, and especially of pre-Soviet references, together with the Great Patriotic War, that is the Second World War in the Soviet Union, and the symbols still are meaningful, and they're changing the meanings. This is like a stream where we have the signifiers that are floating, and they're changing their places, and there is a resignification happening in that stream. A good example is, this national flag, white, red and white flag. For many it was the flag of the National Front of Belarus, and it's related to national identity, the idea of the Belarusian national ethnocultural revival. So it was like the heritage of the great Duchy of Lithuania. But an interesting thing happened, that these colors of white, red and white were also taken over by the people who were primarily Russian-spoken. Of course, they know about the Great Duchy of Lithuania from the textbooks, and they know how the nation building was made. Of course, it was significant. However, in the protests, these points were actually political, not cultural. And then we saw, the new shift of these symbols. And I believe that we will see like that in the future, and we will have eventually the hybrid where we can find different things, and that would even beyond the expectations of analysts like myself. Very interesting, Alexei, and after you have mentioned the Soviet symbols and Soviet identity, well, cultural references, this is what I meant. We have another question, and identities and symbols that are related to the regime of today. What is their place within this pot of identity? Will they be related to the Soviet times, or they will be called, you know, the Lukashistic, like Lukashenko symbols? How do you see it? Or maybe there will be a melting of these symbols and they will not have any form at all?
То есть советская...
Well, look, the Soviet... Soviet in 10 years will be 40 years of independence. Yes, this is what I'm saying. You know, as I said 30 years ago, it was in the 70s. Well, we're becoming older, but you know, anything Soviet for someone it's a golden age, for others it's, you know, just, you know, very grim times. So these are things that are very symbolic. So I believe most probably there will be a kind of new Soviet renaissance among the young people, some nostalgic feelings towards this Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. I just had a discussion with one person who was saying that it was beautiful times in the socialism and the state was taking care of me and so on and so on. It was like a kind of phantom nostalgia. I think something similar will happen to Project Lukashenko. Maybe it will be kind of renaissance of this political project and will be more and more marginal. Maybe it will attract the people who really have not lived under Lukashenko. Well, you know, it was good under Lukashenko. Well, people like sometimes to say that it was good under something, under somebody. Yes. Some people are idealizing Russian Empire, the Russia that we lost, you know, like in the movie, the Siberian Barber and so on. Yeah, you were talking a lot about the young people, new generation that's grown today. In your understanding, what about the Belarusian identity? How it will look like in the future? What are its narratives? In my understanding, the youth will retain its identity and strengthen it, and its mission exactly in that. And when we look back, we as both Soviet generation have showed to the new generation really the legal task when after 3 referendums we have changed drastically the constitution of Belarus, and now we are thinking hard how to get out of this situation when we understand clearly that we cannot go on living with such constitution. We cannot pass it over to next generations, and the people don't want to live anymore under all such autocratic regime that doesn't give them anything. And of course it was difficult for the new generations to clean those tables, and of course one of the decisions made was the equality of Belarusian and Russian languages that in practice turned into the domination of Russian language. So today we can say for the revival of the Belarusian language, which is actively still used by many people, has not disappeared from our agenda. We need to have additional efforts to be put into its real revival, and we need social and civil actions and efforts to be put into it to present maximally comfortable situations and circumstances for further development of the Belarusian language. And of course the identity will also include the national symbols, and I believe that this choice has been made already. I also remember the referendum of 1995, which without any big discussions has changed the national symbols into post-Soviet symbols. As I understand that the national symbols had centuries-old history, and so post-Soviet symbols don't have any symbols, and the present Belarusian symbols don't have any history behind them. And months after the referendum, I was present at the football match between Belarus and Holland, and the Belarusian team won 1-0. And of course, that was big celebration. So also the symbols are important in that respect. What would happen to the post-Soviet symbols? I believe it will be just, you know, on the display in the museums of the Lukashenko times, and then the new Belarus future will be formed by the Belarus people. About the identity, I'm very skeptical about the Belarusian Soviet identity. In the previous session we discussed it, that it's related to the Soviet nations and so on, and that was about the 1990s and 2000s. So today we have a different direction. Lukashenko had a chance to create new Belarusian identity on the basis of the new state, and that was a complete failure. Why? Because there was no new Belarusian pantheon made. Everything was made on the Soviet basis, and nothing really considerably fundamental. Well, let's say there will be a program at the university about the Second World War, and it will be about the Soviet people. Well, in the political sense, of course, it was okay, but later the category of the Soviet people has become abstract, and that was something that, you know, was existing at some time, but nothing emotionally important. So this identity, I believe, will be in the highlight. We can speak about ethno-linguistic meaning, but we have these expressions about the Belarusian language, and it will depend about the citizenship, a Belarusian citizenship, and some synthesis between Soviet identity, Belarusian identity, and cultural identity, and some peripheral discourses But the mainstream will be a synthesis, and only authoritarian regime was hindering this type of development. And these discourses, in fact, of history and Soviet history are not in conflict with the Belarusian identity. They could be easily integrated. There are lots of examples of that, and many discussions of historians were going on about that. Of course, we had the anti-Soviet partisan movement, and there were people who were, fighting against them. It's difficult to come to terms with these two sides. And in Belarus, we can put them together, There were no direct conflict of those sides. And there is no conflict like we call collaborators and the Soviet partisans. In the Soviet history in the last 20 years, if we look how it's written by the Academy of Science, most probably it's going backwards. However, as soon as administrative methods will be weakened, the synthesis will take place, and then the national identity will be also synthesized. And I don't think there is a power now in the regions that would take and assimilate these things among themselves. Well, Andrei, we have another question, but Alexei wanted to add something before that. Okay, we still have some time, so maybe you could put in some comments. Okay, then quickly, but slowly speaking. I believe that you underestimate the level of the Lukashenko project. He really took over, the Soviet symbols from the Soviet Union war times, like the Great Patriotic War, it was called here, and the Soviet people. It was abstract, yes, no ideological expression, of course, and then the Soviet Union was integrated, then we can say there was no such ideological expression. Well, there is an idea of the empire to be, also taken over, and we have this heritage, and the Bulgarians and everybody else were like the ears of the Russian Empire, of course. And we can see that this is a kind of historical construction. And something like that. Very shortly, as far as these people are concerned, it was working at the time when people really were understanding it on the emotional level. They were part of the Soviet Union, and they remembered everything as a part of their identity. But in time, it stopped working. And of course, I have my own arguments about it. But today, we can see that people don't understand it anymore, and Lukashenko cannot also present it like certain good idea. If you could understand it like the partisans, like a part of national identity of the war times, and he could play around it with the several people, then it could be like a continuation of the approach towards the war. So, number two, as far as the war is concerned, the Second World War is not in conflict with national narrative. We don't have a very strong anti-Soviet narrative related to the Second World War. If we look even at the mainstream of the Belarusian historiography, the main thing is that, okay, the Soviet partisans were fighting the Germans, that's okay. And so the synthesis already has happened. And the government today are saying that, look, these were collaborators. And we know that the collaborators are not liked by anybody. We don't know even any historians who glorify such people. So basically, the synthesis has all the arguments for taking place and to be integrated into the national synthetic discourse. Thank you, Andrei. Just another short question. Maybe to Andrei, because you mentioned the Estonian example. And today, any person in the world can become an Estonian citizen. Do you think that in the future in Belarus we may have such situation that any person in the world by remote mode could become the citizens of Belarus? Because we were talking about the international hub concept, so within this context. Okay, I'm talking about the big scale. Well, in Estonia, maybe 2, 3, 10, maybe maximum 20% of the people electronically might become citizens. But if the quantity will come to 30%, then the Estonians will take it as a problem and then they will stop this process. Like in the Soviet times, there was Russian immigration when it has reached more than 20%, it was a problem because the Estonians could have been in the minority in their own country. So, well, let's say, okay, 1 million more will become citizens of Belarus and somewhat will be integrated by coming to Belarus or whatever. But the core of the nation will be still the citizens of Belarus. So I don't think the majority will be those who will become citizens by electronic means. I am very skeptical about that. And this is not really the model of a national identity. So nation building still will be the center of the people that are within the nation itself. So thank you very much. Now we will take the questions and comments from the audience. Yes, please.
Может быть, комментарий к выступлению?
Maybe you have any comments meant for the speakers, for the panelists?
Тогда у меня есть один вопрос. Тоже очень коротко.
Then I have a question. We have 7 minutes left. The question is a bit complex. What mistakes throughout the history, maybe Belarusian history or international history, should be focused on and given attention to, so that we do not make these mistakes again in the future of Belarus? What can we extract from the history? I have already answered this question during the panel, during the day. I think 3 referendums in 1995, 1996 and 2004 initiated by Lukashenko in the essence have brought Belarus to a cul-de-sac, and we are where we are today. And the detailed analysis of the results of each of the referendums shows how, step by step, we came to this point of dead end, and these are the mistakes that we need to analyze and not repeat them. And of course we can solve it also only by initiating a referendum, but it has to be transparent, honest and open dialogue with the nation, and it has to be informed choice of people and conscious choice of people about the development of our country. Alexei, maybe you have any story that is that goes back in time? No, thank you. Andrei, mistakes. It might be international history or Russia. Something. What was happening in the past and what we shouldn't do again. If we take the Belarusian experience of the past 30 years, and if we focus on it, of course the power cannot be concentrated in the hands of one person, one individual, and think that it can lead to success. Sometimes it does, but the majority of cases show that there are more problems than solutions, and we can see it now. We can also argue if it's good that Lukashenko came to power and was staying there during the year 2000 or 1990s, but it's not easy now to discuss it, and it's difficult now to get rid of it. So we shouldn't be doing it again, and the state management has to be more complex, and it has to be ruled by majority at its best case scenario. Next, I think that we shouldn't be naive and think that without a strong social identity we can build a state and a dynamic economy. This is an illusion that was very widespread in Belarus in the 90s, when everything just started, to a less extent in 2000, and it didn't work. Still, we found ourselves in the situation that the question of identity, national unity, common national aims, integration, this is still the issue. It's important, and if we don't reflect on history, it's going to slow down the processes of state building and economy development. Thank you, Andrei. Thank you, Uladзімір. Thank you, Alexei. Thank you, our viewers, for watching us, for listening to us. Keep looking at our news of Minsk Forum. Have a good evening. Take care.